Hello, my name is Matthew Sawyer. I'm the author of Make It in America, How International Companies and Entrepreneurs Can Successfully Enter and Grow in the United States. In my research, I interviewed lots of people around the world. And one of the people that I interviewed was an Italian who was living in Germany. He was running a digital marketing agency. And I asked him, would he consider entering and trying to expand his business into the United States? And he said to me, I'd love to, but I don't even know where to start. And so it's for that person that had that question that started me off in writing this book, in terms of helping them to see what are the areas that they need to know, what are the questions that might come up, how to deal with it, what are the resources that might be available. As I say, it's almost like looking to enter with eyes wide open.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series where we bring together the most interesting people on the planet, business leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, disruptors, innovators. We bring them all here on Fridays. Today, our guest is Matthew Sawyer, who's an American business and marketing strategist, consultant, and author. That was his video on his new book. He's the managing director of the strategy consulting firm Rocket Market Development, which helped companies identify opportunities and gain traction in U.S. market. He's an adjunct professor at Columbia University and at New York University, teaching graduate courses in strategic marketing and communication. Matthew wrote Make It in America, How International Companies and Entrepreneurs Can Successfully Enter and Scale in U.S. markets, which was published fall of 2022, very recent. So with that, I'll welcome Matthew. Hey, man, how you doing?
Thank you, and thank you for the nice introduction. It wouldn't be better if I wrote it myself.
Oh gosh, okay, you're really putting it on there. So I thank you for that. So we do a little research ahead of time to think about what we're going to say. So congrats on your new book. As this is a global audience, I'm now sitting in Dubai. Why would someone consider this book as a must read for global entrepreneurs and business people?
Well, it's really, it's focused in on coming to the United States. And so one of the ideas is that entrepreneurs and businesses want to come to the United States. It is the largest market. It has the biggest access to capital, certainly the stock market in the United States. It's also one of the most stable economies in the world, as we're seeing now in terms of the strength of the dollar. There are a lot of reasons in terms of coming to the United States. And so the book is for people who want to explore or think about coming to the United States, and helping them to think about all of the things that they need to do in order to be successful.
What kind of research would you research mode would you go into to pull all that information out? Because I mean, certain states have certain rules and regulations. Would it be centered around the state, or how did you find all this information and compile it?
Yeah, well, the research for the book, I did do a lot of research. The first thing I did is I put out a questionnaire to about more than 300 people around the world, and I got about 75 responses, which got me in the right track in terms of the kind of things that people wanted to learn about. What do they thought was the biggest obstacles? What are the things that are issues around, as you said, the complexity of the U.S. Legal system and the 50 states? That was one of the issues. Getting financing, how do you hire people? How do you get customers? So that's what I had learned. And then from there, I did research. I interviewed over 120 people in 40 different countries to find out from them in terms of, all sorts of things, as well as interviewing experts and then putting together the information. So to answer your question about how if you're thinking about coming to the United States, What the book does is it sort of gives you an insight into some of the questions that you should ask and where are the areas to do the research. And then, there's a lot of research you can do online and in books and talking to people, but then it also, in terms of, very much says that you need to hire local experts and to get that really inside look, depending on where you're going to want to enter.
Yeah. Hire local experts. I've been in business for a long time, and I hire people who's better at things than I am, which is a lot of things. And that way, I can do what I do better, and try and get a strong footing, based on that. But could we also think of this book for someone that's in America now and would like to start a business? Everybody says, I want to own a business. I want to become an entrepreneur. Yeah, well, and they don't know the first step. Couldn't this book also be used that way? Could it?
Absolutely. And particularly since I think that the number is close to 70% of all new businesses, particularly in the tech field, are started by at least having one of the founders being non-US, being a foreign international, and certainly people coming to school here, wanting to stay here and start businesses. So certainly for them, it would be particularly interesting and valuable. But it would also help other people because it goes into things like, if you're financing a new business or a startup, where are the options in terms of where you can get that financing, and then what are the trade-offs that you need to do, as well as the legal things like which state that you should open up the new business. Yeah. So into some of those issues as well.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine, but he's pretty much set up now, and we were having this conversation. He said he was thinking about going to Delaware. Delaware. He was going to register in Delaware. And I said, you know what, it's best before you move forward, let's just get a lawyer on the phone and kind of walk us through it, an exploratory call, that kind of thing. And then I realized that a lot of companies use that as an option to stay to Delaware. Why would that be versus another state if you came across that?
Yeah, you're right. And there are a few reasons. Number one is that Delaware was one of the first in terms of developing a whole legal system to address corporate law. So they were one of the first states to do that, and they've developed a very not only I would say friendly, but it's something that all of the lawyers that know what the laws are in Delaware. So if you're going to look for investment money, they're familiar with the laws in Delaware, so it just makes it easier for them. So in one sense, it's easier. And then also, if you're going to be thinking about going public or trying to get funding, everyone knows the laws in Delaware. And so that's one of the main reasons. However, if you're not thinking about going public and you just want to be setting up a business, and let's say it's a restaurants in New York, well, there's no reason to go to Delaware. You can just that, and in some ways that would make it easier, because then you don't have to go through hiring a registered agent in Delaware and various things. So it's really for those companies that are looking for getting onto investment money. That's really Delaware is the place to go.
Yeah. I transitioned back and I set up a business entity in out of New Jersey. I live in the suburbs, and so I keep both. But it was so easy. You just went online. I used the register, and it was done just like that. And I'm in Dubai, and here it's going to take a couple of days to go through all of this kind of all the paperwork and all the things you needed and all these kinds of things. So do you see where one state is maybe more advantageous? Because maybe if I'm tech, I say, but you know what, I want to go to Silicon Valley, because the money is there. Investors are probably there. Is that a cool state to go to? In other words, you choose the location by the type of business you're in?
Well, I'm not a tax and legal expert, so
Okay.
There's a little bit out of my, but typically people would look at in terms of where to incorporate doesn't necessarily mean where you're doing business. So there
Okay.
was one company in my book, I have about 14 different case studies of companies. And there was one company, a Belgian company called Rensen, that does outdoor structures and building supplies and things like that. And they ended up locating in the Los Angeles area in California because that had low competitors and there was a lot of building, and particularly for their outdoor. But they did set up the company, incorporate in Delaware, just for the legal and tax reasons.
I
Some of
see.
the other states that people look at, they look at Nevada, which has very low taxes. So that's another implication, of where you would want to. So it doesn't necessarily have to be where you're located, but it's
Mm.
a lot of companies look in terms of, well, where's the most favorable for my type of business?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Then, what do I know? And I'm thinking about that connection. If it's tech, maybe I want to be in a tech area. New York is hot for tech and that kind of thing. If I'm creative, I probably would want to be in a Los Angeles or a New York kind of approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but just to interrupt, but there are two aspects. One is where you locate in terms of where you set up shop, and then the other is well, where you incorporate the business.
Wow.
So I think that, I forget the exact term, the number, but I think it's like most of our Fortune 500 companies, are all registered in Delaware as being incorporated in Delaware. But as you know, they're located in every state. New Jersey has a huge amount of corporate headquarters. So where you locate is really irrelevant versus where you set up and where you incorporate.
Two different things. So, what did you find most surprising in that research? As you were going through this, and you were compiling the data, and was there any aha moments that you said, "Never would have thought of this piece of the relationship between these two data sets," or whatever it was?
I don't know in terms of whether it was I think it was more reinforcing, and just in terms of, looking at the strength of the United States, in terms of it being, a great place for business, as well as the perception of the United States from outside of the country. Sure, we've had some in recent years, it's their brand has been tarnished a little bit.
Hmm.
But for overwhelmingly, it is positive. Um,
Yeah.
and, I was also looking at, there's a lot of news reports or whatever around, what a divided country it is, what a, um, unfriendly, but for the most part, and particularly talking with foreign nationals that have come to the United States, that they've said overwhelmingly how friendly and helpful people have been.
Hmm.
So that
Hmm.
was really very encouraging. And I think that maybe that was a little bit surprising.
Yeah. So, for leaders who are thinking globally, so someone maybe sitting in Dubai thinking about the US versus other markets, whether it be Europe or whatever it is, any advice that you would give to them? How would they go about doing that research? Maybe they wanted to open an outpost in Greece or whatever, because from a global perspective, I found that once you've gone through the process here, Dubai is very, very business friendly.
Right.
Um, but from a global aspect,
Well, I think it's, doing, due diligence. The head of the German American Chamber of Commerce was talking about how, companies really need to do their homework, and then having a good plan. And then, just as you would do in any business, putting together a solid strategic plan, looking at doing a situation analysis, looking at, who the competitors are, what are the products that you're going to bring in. So
wow.
for example, this Belgian company, Rensen, they have a whole host of buildings and supply products, but they just focused in on their outdoor structures because they felt that that was the one that was most had the most potential.
Mm.
And so even just choosing which of the products that you're going to bring in, because those are, um, all decisions. So in the book, I have a framework that I use that was developed by A.G. Lafley, who had been the CEO of Procter and Gamble, and it's called Playing to Win. And it revolves around answering 5 questions. The first question is that, well, what does winning mean? What is your winning aspiration?
Okay.
The second question is that, where do you want to play? What are the markets? What are the products?
Yeah.
What stage of the value chain do you want to be in? And then the next one is that, well, how are you going to win? Are you going to be low price? Is it differentiation? And then after that would be in terms of, well, what do you need? What are the resources that you need? And then the last one is that what are the systems that you need in order to keep that into place? So I use that framework as a way, and then going through in terms of how you would go about thinking about and making and looking at what are those decisions you'd need to make if you were going to make a major move into the United States.
That's a webinar. You just gave the premise of a webinar just based on those 5 questions, because people would pay to go through that. And the reason I say this is because, you always run into people and everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. But lots of times they haven't given one thought beyond that statement. How do I build it from there? So, I like the concept that as a strategic advisor and understanding strategy. So, but by going through that framework, that should allow a person to get a better picture of what they would want to do to take it probably to the next step.
Yeah, and just in terms of understanding what are the questions that need to be answered. So for example, if you have there was a Scottish company that had a particular honey that came from the Scottish Highlands and had a particular taste. In terms of, well, investigating, well, what's the potential, in terms of, and it would require research to find out, well, in the case of, America, well, where do people consume a lot of honey and do they like this particular flavor and things like that. So it's there needs to be research, but at least it gets you into these are the plan. And then from there, what do we need to investigate? The other statistic I had heard is that, of startups, that 90% of them have had to make from their original plan of what they thought they were going to do. 90% of them have had some sort of a major change from what that plan was. So, I think it was President Eisenhower has said, plans are meaningless, but planning is everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And causes that U-turn or that adjustment or whatever it is, the detours I call them, and in trying to take that to the next step. So as someone who is thinking this through, should they be interested in trying to find a partnership, or just come in and do it alone without the honey people? I don't know. I don't understand the market behind it, but would they be interested in maybe a partnership or
well, that's one of the, so I think that it's sort of looking at all of the various options. What are the options? And a lot of it has to do with what company, what's the resources of the company, what is the one of the things, for example, one of the things that I did very early in my career, I worked at an advertising agency, and we helped Hyundai to come into the United States. And this is in the mid 1980s. And at that time, Hyundai was a global manufacturing giant, but no one in the United States had ever heard of them. Yeah. And then they had this funny name. And then some people were pronouncing it as that high and dry, which isn't great for a car company.
No, yeah.
So what we had to do was that we established that they were, and for 4 months we ran advertising that showed that Hyundai was the world's largest shipbuilder, that they were a massive builder in terms of skyscrapers and buildings. They were in all of these, manufacturing, and then 4 months later, after we've established their reputation, then we brought them into the United States with, introducing a new car, which was the fastest growing new car in the history of the auto industry. But because of the size and the resources, well, they had to not pick one place, but they went, across the entire country. And one of the things that we help them to do is also build up a dealer network and all sorts of things like that. Yeah. So long answer to your question, but every situation is different, depending if it's a small startup versus a world-class manufacturing giant like Hyundai.
Yeah. So one of my clients is the Vin Group out of Vietnam.
Yep.
And they just moved into the U.S. and they just signed this big deal. I think it was in Tennessee. They're going to building a plant there, and they kind of went against the concept you're talking about, because nobody had ever heard of Vin Group, and then all of a sudden they're signing this agreement. They're going to start building cars out of Tennessee. So as you said, they're going to need a dealer network and all these kind of things. I'm sure that's being done, but that's
aren't they a battery company? I thought they were a battery company.
No, it's a conglomerate. It's about, when I did work for them, it was about 6 different verticals.
Oh, okay.
Hotels, resorts,
Yeah. We'll see what they, it was at least in the case of Hyundai, previously 2 years before, there was a Yugoslavian company that tried to come to the United States with a car called the Yugo.
Yes.
And the thing would break down, and then it was called, Car and Driver called it the worst car ever made. Yeah. And people would call it the no-go.
Yeah.
And that was I think it was for about $5,000 for back in it. And then Hyundai was coming in 2 years later for a car that was $6,000. So people had this, in their minds, says, I'm not going to buy this, low cost car that no one's ever heard of. Right. It could be the next Yugo. Okay. So they really had to, in their particular case, they had to build up the credibility so that people trusted them. And that's, in terms of, in doing business, it's all around, do people trust either your brand? Do they trust you? And likewise, both ways too. So, as I said, every situation is different, and it's really understanding, asking the right questions, doing the research, doing the homework. We do a lot in terms of testing and learning, trying something, seeing what happens, refining it. So there's lots of different methodologies. It's kind of not one way, which personally I think makes it so much more interesting, because then you have to really use your strategic and creative brain to figure out, well, how are you going to do something that's different, that's going to make an impact?
Yeah. Strategy is a word that's kind of thrown all over the place. A lot of clients that I deal with, and what is a 2-3 strategic thrust? And it's really not strategy. It's, at least in the terms that I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert on this. Strategy is current state, and I want to get here as future state. And the strategy is going to get me there. And then the KPIs or whatever I needed under there is going to allow me to measure.
Right.
That is kind of
certainly having, a big strategic idea, is sort of more of a long term. Whereas, a lot of people confuse strategies and tactics. So tactics are much more of a short term. I actually teach at NYU a course in competitive business strategy. And we go through this. And one of the books that I use is Garry Kasparov, the chess master, who wrote a book that Life Imitates Chess. And one of the things that he talked about is that in strategy, in chess, you have different strategies for each part of the game, and the strategy is sort of the long-term view of the game, and how are you going to go about? Is it going to be an aggressive? Or are you going to be conservative? Or are you going to? And then the tactics are more of, well, what are each move that you're going to make? that then delivers on that strategy.
Okay. I like that analogy. Because I mean, that's a part of what someone is trying to do. But here's what I read. I forget now where it was. There was some research was done post-COVID, and they were basically kind of knocking the long-term strategy. So think of organizations, airlines going in, or logistics centers, and they've got a 5 to 10 year strategy. I had someone, not as a client, but was in one of the situations that I was running, was from Dubai Airport, and he was talking about how they look 20 to 25 years into the future, passenger load and all these kind of things. So the article was about when COVID hit, you need to have a shorter window, because all the way here, you might not make it, because that disruption kind of taught people a different lesson. Was that a strong learning point, COVID?
Well, actually, yeah, and it was definitely. And one of the things that COVID did, it was like one of these. There was an article. I forget who had written it. It was in the Harvard Business article about strategy and COVID, and they were talking about how it was one of those moments where all of the regression analysis and all of the things that were those trends that all of a sudden changed, because it was one of these moments that you couldn't rely on the trends and doing like a regression analysis of what had happened before. So it was one of those things that, you needed to rethink and relook at it. And the article was talking about how it really now was more about, well, you really needed the strategists now, because then they have to look at all of the various factors and rethink the whole thing, as opposed to continue to be doing, what had been done before.
Right. And then when you hit that speed bump, so from my lower perch, a lot lower than where you are, I said that strategy was a gift for business. I know there was disruption. People lost, a lot of lives were lost, but I think my thought is it was the best thing could have happened to organizations, because it caused them to realize that you could be disrupted at any time, and everything was smooth. It's just like driving down on cruise control, and all of a sudden it's disrupted. That's the Ron Thomas version of looking.
Well, it certainly gave people, a time to reset and to rethink. I think now as a lot of people are rethinking in terms of what they were doing and looking for something better, which I think is a really, positive thing. For me, I was incredibly fortunate and lucky is that I used the time to write this book. It was, I didn't, my consulting clients, I was on March 10th of 2019, I was actually up in running a leadership workshop for a company up in Portland, Maine. And in the middle of the conference, someone came in and said, "We have to close this down. The president says everyone needs to leave." And that was, from there, then I went into hibernation for a year. I still was able to teach. A lot of that was shifted to online.
Yeah.
But it gave me the opportunity to really spend the time, really a good year and a half working on this book.
Yeah. I was in Bangkok, headed to Hong Kong, and was told, you can't come here. You got to go back. And then when I tried to get a flight, it took me a day and a half to get a flight, because everything was in the process of shutting down. When I got back into Dubai, 2 days later, they shut it down for 2 to 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I just got in under that window. So let's take a commercial break and we'll come right back.
Okay.
So
sounds
give
good.
us the minute, folks. Okay, cool.
Would you like to discover powerful ways to drive change in your organization? Would you like to learn about the latest concepts in people strategy, HR effectiveness, and optimization that will help your organization achieve a competitive advantage in your industry? Then HRBP MBA Masterclass with Ron Thomas is for you. With today's uncertain business landscape, HR leaders now play a pivotal role in what some say is a paradigm shift in the industry. This comprehensive 3-day program, in person or virtual, will empower you to embrace a more strategic mindset, enhance your decision-making skills, and help your organization to the next level. To register as a group or individual, email us at info@strategyfocusgroup.com or visit our website at www.strategyfocusgroup.com.
Before the break, you talked about a company that navigated and was able to come into the market because they'd done their research and things had worked. Let's flip that and give us a case, not really naming the company, how a company did everything wrong, and what should they not do, in trying to make this entry.
Yeah. Well, let me give you, and I will name the company. So there was in the book, I have several different case studies, and there was one company called Menk Fenster, and it was a German company that had been in business for 130 years, making fine, high energy efficient windows manufactured in Germany. And in 2015, they had been selling some windows to the United States. And they said, well, here's an opportunity. We really want to get into the U.S. market. And so they set up a joint venture with another company, a logistics company, and then they opened up a factory in Western Massachusetts. They got over $1 million in tax incentives. They got a $5 million tax-exempt bond that was issued for them. They got all of these investors. And then 2 years later, they ended up closing up the factory and closing down that division. So, you're probably thinking, well, 2 years, well, what did they do wrong? Yeah. Well, it was a bunch of different things. The first thing is that they didn't investigate in terms of the market, in terms of what were the American consumers looking for in terms of windows. So in Europe, in Germany, the people use windows where it's called twist and turn, and you pull it into a room. Yeah. Whereas in the United States, we use windows that are either double hung or casement windows that go out because, us Americans, we don't want anything to invade our space. So that was one thing that they did wrong. The other thing is their windows were like twice as much money because they were highly energy efficient. And in 2015, 16, energy prices were half the price in the United States as they were in Europe, because gas prices were, and it's changed a bit, and but that really was an incentive, and so people weren't going to spend twice as much money for doing it. So they totally misread the market in terms of what the market size or the market potential is. The other thing, they in their factory, they had this really complicated computer-aided design systems and manufacturing systems, and they couldn't find the skilled talent, the engineers and people to run it. And so what they ended up having to do is they ended up having to find people, then teach them how to do it. And that took a lot longer than they thought. So it was after about a year and a half, and their sales were so far below what the investors had counted on, that the investor says, this, we don't think that this is going to make it. And then the investors pulled their money.
Wow. So I'm a big fan of postmortems, as well as premortems. You think about it before and then after you. Because if you go through that and you think about the learning that all of that invested, and I'm sure, the tail between your legs and you got to go back because it didn't work out. Are they still around in their market, back to their home market, and still thriving?
Yeah. So they basically closed up their, what they call Menk USA. And then they closed that factory, and then they're just producing in Germany. I think they're probably selling some, they're shipping through distributors to the United States, but it isn't the same commitment, and it doesn't have that same upside. companies, they wanted to come to the United States because there's such a huge, upside. Is that, thinking about it as an investment is that it's not just a 1 or 2 times return. You can get a 10, 20, some of the 100 times returns just because of the size of the, if you think about it, the size of the U.S. building market is just huge.
Yeah, yeah. And even getting a sliver of that and growing that over a piece of time. So let's switch back to you. You a lot of your work is dealing with these so-called, I say so-called senior leaders. I call them the big shots.
Yeah.
And talking through deep issues around strategy and all those kinds of things. What's the most important leadership lesson you've learned over the course of your career?
Well, I think that I tend to, I'd say, almost like lead from the middle. And that in terms of getting involved and being, part of the team and, listening to people, and not having sort of well, I'm the boss, and then you have to, listen to, I make the decisions. So that's my management style, and that sort of, work, but that doesn't work for for example, some of the, in the financial services industry, which tends to be more of a, hierarchy. So, that approach, wouldn't really work well, but that's sort of my style. And it's particularly works well in the classroom and as an advisor, because I'm really, there to be more of a coach, not to tell people what to do, but to help them to think through in terms of, well, have you thought about this? And, well, let me do this investigation for you, or, being part of their team as opposed to the sage that comes in and tells you what to do.
Yeah, read the tea leaves. Yeah. We've all kind of been there, over a period of time. So you talked about coaching, because part of your CV here, marketing strategist, consultant, and part of that is playing the role of coach. Where do the coaching skills come from? So coaching is about asking the questions and prodding people along as opposed to being directive. Where did that come from? Was that always kind of your personality? And
yeah, I was really fortunate. So I was at a young age, at the age of, I think I was 17 or 18. I always worked in restaurants and things, and I went up and I worked at this summer camp. And they made me in charge of the kitchen, which was, and I had 15 other teenagers reporting to me, and they all were about the same age. And so it was a really, I got thrown into being a leader at a very early age. And I, certainly made a lot of mistakes, but I really loved it. And just the fact that, people looking up to you and you're, I guess I caught the bug, and then, was able to work in management and various roles. And then now, as a teacher, it's leading, but leading in a different direction. It's leading in terms of, getting people, inspiring them to think about what their possibilities are.
Yeah.
And, that's so gratifying in terms of to see the success and to see how, I've helped to make a difference with so many people.
Yeah. I run a little exercise when you talk about people that have had major influences on people. And, it's the kind of stories you just told. You started at 17 and you was put in this role. And that was kind of an anchor, to take you where you are today. What about individuals that kind of partnered with you, or you watched what they were doing, impressed you, important influences?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I was able to, one of the jobs that I had, I was head of marketing for a company, Pitney Bowes, which is a global $250 250, Fortune 250 company. And we had employed, I was doing events with them, for them, as well as working with the consultants. And I was able to work with Clay Christensen. And Clay was a Harvard business professor. And he's sort of known for being his ideas about disruption and innovation have been really well-rounded. He had been a consultant with, for example, the country of Japan, and helping Japan in terms of think about being. And so he was really influential in terms of talking about, his life. And one of the things that I learned from him is he said, what is it that you want people to what drives you? What is the purpose? What do you want to do? And is it to make more money? Is it to rise up in the organization? And for him, he measured his success. He talked about, how do you measure your life? He measured his life on the number of people that he was able to positively influence.
Wow.
And, it was such a, and I try to do that, but it was also one of the reasons why I left corporate America and then moved into consulting and moved into teaching, because then I can, influence, and I can talk with and help, so many more people than, in those settings.
Yeah, that's powerful, because I tend to think kind of the same way, people you impact. And a young lady who's a big shot at Accenture, and we were working together years and years ago on, we had a talk one morning, one morning, and she was very emotional. She was going through a lot. And she was just selected as the top 10 in this particular field. I won't describe it any more than that. And I sent her a note. I said, a big smile from Dubai.
Right.
And she sent me this side note, and she said, I still go back to the conversation we had. And I'm thinking, wow, I thought of the same thing. And she said, that was so impactful for me. So a lot of this is attributed to what you did. And I said, oh my goodness, as I read that. And throughout the day, I would go back and read it again. I'm like, wow, that's powerful, because you impacted someone. And it was such a good feeling when you're able to do that.
Yeah. And I'm just I'm so fortunate working at, being able to teach at Columbia University and NYU. I get to, have students with, these bright students from all over the world. I have students from Asia, from Dubai, from Africa, from Europe, from South America, certainly Canada and America too. And it's so wonderful to see, and people are the students are so thankful, in terms of, but it's a lot of work, because they also, if you don't put the effort in and you don't give it your 100%, they know that. And, they can be, they have high standards, and you have to live up to those standards.
Yeah. So that was one of my interview questions when I was working in corporate. If I was interviewing someone, I'd ask people a question. Go back to the first time you've managed people and tell me the last time you've heard from someone from that era.
Yeah.
And when they could not give me a conversation or whatever it was, I said, let's go to the next job. Can you give me the same kind of reflection point? Who do you still hear from? When was the last time you heard from them? What was the general gist of what it was? Maybe they got married or new career.
Right.
And if they came back with a couple of no's, I wasn't too much interested in that, because I wanted to hire people. And now that I look back on it now, I always wanted to hire people that was going to make an impact, that you're hiring someone that's younger and those kind of things. And that's probably fulfilling for you, as you just said, in working at a university, because you're getting raw talent.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one story. There was a woman from Greece. And so she was, in our program, and then she went back to Greece, and her family had a chain of bakeries, I guess, dining bakeries. And then she wrote to me that she had used some of the tools, and it was about strategy and business, and helped them to put together a new business plan that they were able to then grow and become more profitable. And she wrote to me to thank me, to tell me this story about how she was able to help her family in Greece.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, making an impact. So what's next for you? So you're teaching now. You're still your consulting practice.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm having a lot of fun, getting out there and talking about the book. I don't exactly know where it's going to take me. I have this feeling that, it's going to lead me to a good place. I'm meeting a lot of interesting people, and people have been really positive about the book. So I just have this feeling it's going to lead me to a good place. Certainly I'm looking for, helping other companies, particularly if ones that want to come to the United States in either a consulting or a coaching capacity. So that's certainly one of the things that I'm looking to do. Okay.
What is your website?
So the book's website is that www.matthewleesawyer.com.
Okay.
And the reason that I had to add the Lee, because I found out that there's another author out there who writes these really wacky science fiction stories.
Yeah.
His name is Matthew Lee.
Strategy. I don't do that yet.
And then my website is my company, the consulting company is Rocket Market Development. So
that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for making time for us. Really appreciate it. We'll do a rebroadcast of this, later in the week. And thank you so much. And it was so good to finally meet you through the Heidi connection. And next time I'm in New York, man, let's go hang out and get some food and sit and talk a little more.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank your team too for helping to put this together.
Okay, cool. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.